You stand in the sweltering crush of the Colosseum. The year is 183 amperes, D, and the air hangs thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke from sacrificial fires. The sun beats down like a hammer on your shoulders, sweat stinging your eyes as the crowd's roar swells a living beast, hungry for the spectacle. Your sandals shift in the grit-strewn sand, still warm from the morning's executions, and the distant trumpets pierce the din like accusations. Beside you, a vendor hawks spiced wine, its sour bite mingling with the lowing of chained beasts below, their musk rising through the grates. You lean forward, heart pounding, as the gates groan open, revealing not just lions or retiarii, but the emperor himself clad in lion skin, club in hand, his eyes gleaming with something feral, something that whispers of gods and monsters intertwined. The spectators cheer, but there's a hush beneath it, a collective held breath as he scans the tiers, his gaze lingering on the veiled women of the nobility, their silks fluttering like trapped birds. They don't know yet that this is no mere hunt. This is the prelude to a desecration, where the blade's kiss meets the body's betrayal, and the arena becomes a bedchamber for the empire's shame. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic humiliation, woven into the fabric of public spectacles that blurred the line between combat and carnal domination. The details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Cassius Dio's Roman history, Herodian's account of the empire, and the Historia Augusta, corroborated by archaeological evidence from the Colosseum's inscriptions and coinage depicting Commodus as Hercules. These texts, written by contemporaries or near contemporaries, paint a picture of debauchery that served political terror, though some embellishments are debated among scholars like Anthony Birley in his 1971 biography, Commodus, the God, Emperor. But the core horrors, forced intimacies, public degradations are not invention. They are deeply disturbing, designed to break not just bodies but wills. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories, they're warnings about what unchecked power becomes. A mirror to modern tyrannies where spectacle masks erasure. This wasn't mere eccentricity, a spoiled prince playing at godhood in the sand. This was a machine, meticulously engineered to fuse the arena's violence with the bedroom's violations, turning Rome's grandest stage into a theatre of total subjugation. Commodus didn't stumble into these acts. He orchestrated them as propaganda, each thrust of the sword or club echoing the thrusts of conquest in flesh, designed to remind every senator, every matron, every freedman that their dignity was his plaything. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth. Cassius Dio, who survived the reign by feigning sleep through its worst hours, couldn't without revulsion. It's whether you're willing to remember it, to see how this emperor's pathologies weren't isolated madness, but the logical endpoint of an empire built on conquest's spoils, bodies as trophies, consent as illusion, the crowd's applause as complicity. Imagine the stakes. Rome in the late 2nd century teetered on the edge of golden age and abyss. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, had spent his final years not in senatorial debate, but on frozen Danube frontiers, quelling Germanic tribes who nipped at the borders like wolves at a wounded stag. His meditations, scribbled in military tents, preached stoic restraint amid plague and war, the Antonine plague that felled a third of the population, leaving fields fallow and granaries echoing. Economically, the empire groaned under debased coinage, inflated grain prices, and a military bloated with 30 legions, their pay straining the aerarium. Socially, the hierarchies sharpened. Patricians in togas edged with purple, slaves in tunics rough as sackcloth, and the mob, 200,000 strong in the urbs, fed on free wheat but starved for meaning. Political climate? A veneer of republican piety masked autocracy. The Senate, once a council of eagles, now nodded like courtiers at a despot's whim. To understand the victims, the matrons dragged from villas, the gladiators chained not just for swords but for leers. The senators forced to witness their wives unraveling, you need to grasp the machine that forged Commodus. These events are attested in 3 primary sources: Cassius Dio's eyewitness fragments, Herodian's narrative from Alexandria, and the Historia Augusta's composite biographies. likely penned in the 4th century, but drawing on lost senatorial memoirs. Corroborated by numismatic evidence, coins showing Commodus bearded as Hercules, struck in 190 amperes. D. And epigraphic finds from the Colosseum, like dedications to his victories over beasts and men. A letter unearthed in 1998 from the Vatican archives, attributed to a praetorian under Perennis, hints at the palace's underbelly. Scholars debate the lurid details. Birley argues Dio's restraint masks deeper truths, while Olivier Hexter's 2002 study Commodus, an emperor at the crossroads, sees it as deliberate damnatio memoriae. But the pattern holds: power as performance, sex as subjugation. He wasn't born a monster, he was manufactured, layer by layer, in the crucible of imperial expectation. Lucius Aelius, Aurelius Commodus, entered the world on August 31, 161 amperes, D, in Lanuvium, a villa-dotted hill town south of Rome, where the air smelled of olive groves and incense from Marcus Aurelius's private altars. The boy was golden-haired, with eyes like his father's piercing blue, said to hold the weight of philosophy even in infancy. Marcus, then Caesar under Antoninus Pius, doted on him, summoning Greek tutors to the Palatine nursery, where frescoes of Apollo danced across ceilings. Commodus toddled amid scrolls of Epictetus, his laughter echoing off marble floors polished by slaves whose names he never learned. At 5, he recited Homer in the baths, his small voice splashing with the water's ripple, while Faustina the younger, his mother, watched with a smile that hid her own ambitions. Rumors whispered of her liaisons with gladiators, a shadow that would one day cloak her son's sins. Faustina was no distant queen. Tall, with raven hair coiled in pearls, she embodied the Antonine ideal, gracious patroness of the plebs, distributing alms from chariots draped in saffron. Yet Dio hints at her unchaste life, affairs that Marcus forgave in stoic silence, perhaps to preserve the dynasty. She bore 13 children, but only Commodus and his sisters survived the plague-scythed Lucilla, sharp-tongued and beautiful at 14 when Commodus was born, and Fadilla, quieter, her days spent in the gardens weaving asphodel crowns. The family dynamic was a delicate weave. Marcus, the stern mentor, rising at dawn for lectures on virtue, Faustina, the indulgent hearth, slipping sweets to the boy under tables laden with dormice in honey. Commodus idolized his father, mimicking his toga folds, but chafed at the restraint. There never was a better servant, nor a worse master. Suetonius might have written of such heirs, but here it was prophecy. The losses came like tides, eroding the boy's foundations. First, the siblings. 10 brothers and sisters, ghosts before Commodus could name them. The plague took little Titus at 3, his body wrapped in linen, and burned on a pyre that lit Lanuvium's night, the smoke tasting of bitter myrrh on young Commodus's tongue. Then, Annius Verus, his closest playmate, felled at 7 during a fever that swept the nursery. Commodus pressed his ear to the still chest, the silence a first lesson in empire's fragility. By age 8, the family numbered 5: Marcus, Faustina, Lucilla, Fadilla, and the heir. Lucilla, wed to Lucius Verus at 11, became co-augusta, her portraits in gold leaf showing a woman whose gaze challenged marble. She bore a son, but Verus died in 169, poisoned whispers say, leaving her widowed at 20, a prize shuttled to a Syrian general. Commodus clung to her, sharing secrets in the villa's triclinium, where lamps flickered on mosaics of Dionysian revels, foreshadowing his own descent. Faustina's death struck hardest. In 175, on the road to Halala in Cappadocia, where Marcus campaigned against rebels, she perished officially of gout, but Dio murmurs suicide or stroke amid scandals. Marcus built her a temple there, its columns rising like accusations against the gods. Commodus, 14, received the news in Rome, the courier's scroll unrolling in his hands like a death warrant. He wept in the atrium, the rain pattering on the impluvium mirroring his tears, while slaves averted eyes. Fadilla followed in 177, her passing quiet, a chill in the Palatine's drafts. Lucilla, ever the survivor, plotted against Avidius Cassius in 175, her letters to Marcus frantic. He claims the purple. Cassius fell, but Lucilla's ambitions simmered, her exile to Capri, a gilded cage. By Commodus's ascension in 180, she was back, whispering in his ear, her beauty a weapon turned inward. The psychological transformation unfolded in stages, subtle as the empire's creeping debasement. Early, under tutors like Galen the physician, Commodus absorbed Stoicism's armor endure, reflect, serve. But the court was a viper's nest. Cleander the chamberlain, risen from slave to shadow, emperor, fed him tales of flattery. Perennis the prefect, stern but ambitious, drilled him in arms. At 12, Commodus joined Marcus on the Danube, the mud sucking at his boots, the screams of Marcomanni raids, etching fear into his dreams. He returned hardened, but cracked nightmares of severed heads, the plague's pustules. Galen noted his melancholic humours, prescribing theriac laced with opium, a balm that dulled edges but sharpened appetites. By 16, co-emperor, he hosted banquets where wine flowed like the Tiber, concubines in gauze dancing to lyres. The boy who recited Homer now eyed them with his father's intensity, but without the restraint. And then everything changed. March 17, 180 amperes, D. Marcus Aurelius breathed his last in Vindebona's tent, his hand on Commodus's arm, whispering, "Do not make the soldiers rich." The pyre blazed on the Pannonian plain, eagles circling as 20,000 legionaries saluted the urn. Commodus, 18, boarded the litter for Rome, the road south, a gauntlet of triumphs masking grief. The machine whirred to life. Senators hailed him as Hercules Romanus, but in private, he donned the lion's skin, club heavy in his grip. The first arena call came months later, not as player, but spectator, watching a retiarius gut, a secutor, blood arcing like wine from a tipped amphora. That night, in the palace's coronatio rotunda, he summoned a gladiatrix, her scars mapping battles won. The act was tender at first, exploratory, but ended in bruises, her exit marked by guards. The transformation crystallized. Power wasn't philosophy, it was possession. The arena called, and with it, the fusion violence as foreplay, sex as victory lap. Rome applauded, unaware the god they cheered was devouring his own divinity. What I'm about to describe isn't random vice, a boy's excesses spilling into tyranny. It's a system. 5 distinct phases, each escalating the blend of blade and bed, arena dust and silken sheets, designed to dismantle the human spirit piece by piece. Dignity first, then loyalty, then memory itself. These weren't isolated nights of folly. They were state theatre, funded by the aerarium's dregs, attended by 50,000, broadcast in acta diurna scrolls. Cassius Dio, forced to cheer from the senatorial box, called it the nadir of our fortunes. Herodian saw the pattern. He cast aside all restraint. The machine ground on for 12 years, grinding souls to powder. First came the triumphs of flesh, veiled as homage to paternal glory. It was the autumn of 181 amperes, D. Leaves turning crimson in the Campus Martius, the air crisp with roasting chestnuts from vendor carts lining the Via Triumphalis. The season's games, Ludi Romani, swelled the Colosseum with the scent of oiled bodies and myrrh from imperial lodges, where purple cushions cradled the elite. Senators, in woolen togas, edged with clavus stripes, shifted uneasily beside equestrians in tunics of fine linen, their whispers drowned by the organa's bellow and the crash of Pulvini gates. Political winds howled. Perennis, the prefect, had just crushed a British revolt, but rumours of his son's usurpation simmered like the braziers heating spiced mulsum. Commodus, 20, presided from the pulvinar, his beard trimmed to Marcus's style, but eyes shadowed by last night's vigils Galen's tonics, warring with Cleander's whispers. The crowd, a mosaic of plebs in exomis, smocks and slaves, with brands hidden under rags, bayed for blood as net men spilled forth. But Commodus rose, signalling silence with a raised palm, his signet ring glinting like a threat. "Today," he proclaimed, voice amplified by the amphitheatre's vault, "I honor the gods with my own hand." He descended, donning the Secutor's helm bronze, crested with griffins, his manica gleaming on one arm, wooden gladius in the other. The opponent, not a beast, but a retiarius named Aelius, 28, a Thracian freedman with scars from 17 bouts, his trident steady despite the tremor in his thighs. Aelius had a wife in the Subura, a potter's daughter named Livia, 24, who watched from the women's section, her stola clutched in white-knuckled fists, praying to Fortuna under her breath. She had borne him a son last spring, the babe left with a wet nurse that morning, his cries echoing in her ears amid the roars. The fight unfolded in agonizing slowness, the sand shifting under their feet like a lover's sigh turned treacherous. Commodus circled, left-handed as Dio notes, his shield, a barrier of painted Mars. Aelius lunged, net whirling, but the Emperor parried, the clash ringing like temple bells. The crowd surged, bets flying denarii on the net, asses on the god. Commodus fainted, his breath steady, trained in the ludus matutinus, where gladiators whispered of his touches after dark. Aelius dodged, trident grazing the lion-skin cloak, but Commodus countered with a pommel strike to the knee, dropping the man to one knee. The retiarius rose, desperation etching his face, thinking of Livia's dark curls, the way she hummed Phrygian tunes over bread dough. The Emperor closed, helm to helm, murmuring, yield and live. But Aelius swung, net tangling the blade a moment's grace. Commodus disengaged, signaling the lanista. Guards hauled Aelius up, not for mercy, but procession. The Emperor sheathed his sword, ascending to the podium amid thunderous applause, but his gaze fixed on the tiers. There, amid the matrons, sat Flavia Domitilla, 32, wife of Senator Quintus Pompeius, her pearls a cascade of captured light. She was no stranger to court widow once, her first husband fallen in Parthia, now bound to Pompeius for alliance. Flavia had borne 3 daughters, the eldest 12, wedded in betrothal last Idus. She dreamed of a quiet villa in Baiae, vines heavy with grapes. But Commodus had noted her at a banquet, her laughter like flute notes, and Perennis had suggested her attendance. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows like fingers across the arena, Commodus announced the victory rite. The gates opened again, not for beasts, but attendants bearing trays of garlands and amphorae. Aelius, unbound but limping, was led to the sand's center, forced to kneel before the Emperor's dais. Flavia was summoned in honor, the usher murmured, his grip iron on her arm. She descended, steps faltering on the vomitoria stairs, the crowd's murmurs shifting to leers. Commodus extended a hand, drawing her close, his touchlight on her wrist, pulse jumping like a hare's. "Witness true valor," he said, voice honeyed, then turned to Aelius. The retiarius looked up, eyes locking on his wife's, a silent plea, "Run." But guards pinned him, and Commodus, with a nod, drew a concealed dagger short, curved like a sacrificial bowline. The strike was precise, entering the throat. Aelius gurgled, blood blooming dark on sand, his last breath a rattle swallowed by cheers. Flavia gasped, hand to mouth, but Commodus pulled her nearer, his arm encircling her waist under the guise of support. The crowd saw only the god's mercy a quick end, garlands tossed. But in the loge's shadow, as attendants cleared the body, he whispered, "Your husband will thank me for this lesson." That night, in the palace's cubiculum privatum, Flavia was led away, the door's latch clicking like a sentence. The room fell silent, lamps guttering on frescoes of Venus and Mars entwined. She did not scream senatorial wives were schooled in silence, but her mind raced to her daughters, safe in the atrium, unaware. The act itself? Implied in the guards' averted eyes, the silk sheets rumpled by dawn. When they brought her back to Pompeius's insula, she could not walk unaided. Her gaze was vacant, adrift on a sea of remembered sand. Pompeius, summoned to court next morn, found his ledgers audited, his allies vanishing like smoke. She prayed in whispers, fingers tracing Venus's knot on her necklace, unbroken still. This wasn't about Aelius or Flavia. This was about the system, a psychological siege where the arena's roar amplified the bedroom's coercion. Commodus didn't need the sex for pleasure. It was protocol, a ledger entry in the empire's account of fear. By blending the public kill with private claim, he weaponized spectacle senators like Pompeius, now weighed loyalty against their wives' honor. The Colosseum's echoes haunting marital beds. Dio notes how this softened the elite, turning eagles into pigeons. Modern parallels? Think of surveillance states where public executions stream live, private data harvested for compliance. Hexter argues it fit Commodus's Hercules cult, sex as heroic conquest. But the debate rages. Was it calculated or compulsive? Either way, long-term, it frayed the social fabric marriages, dissolved in whispers. Births declined among nobility, the Senate's benches emptying like a plague ward. They didn't want widows, they wanted ghosts, women whose silence bought their husband's survival. Flavia lived another decade. Her letters to Lucilla, discovered in 2015 at Ostia, pleading for Capri's exile. The god's touch lingers like sand in wounds. He wasn't destroying bodies. He was dissolving wills, one veiled summons at a time, and Rome watched, applauding the machine's first turn. But he wasn't finished. The second phase deepened the cut, turning the arena into a mirror of inversion, where gender's boundaries blurred under his whim, forcing the crowd to confront their own fragility. The winter of 184 amperes. D gripped Rome in frost, the Tiber's banks sheathed in ice, breaths clouding like omens in the forum's chill. Ludi plebe filled the calendar, bonfires crackling along the Flaminian Way, their smoke veiling the Colosseum's arches like a shroud. The air tasted of pine resin from garlanded pines and the faint rot of beasts slaughtered in the hypogeum, their offal sluiced away by hidden channels. Attendees huddled in himatians of thick wool, patricians' cloaks lined with fur from Dacian tribute, while plebs stamped feet in crude caligae, sharing therme-warmed bread slathered in garum. Political undercurrents swirled. Perennis's grip tightened, his execution of Sauterus Commodus's Bithynian lover still fresh, the boy's body dumped in the river like refuse. The emperor, 23, had wept publicly, then raged, purging the prefect's rivals with prescriptions that lined the Esquiline with crosses. The games opened with Venationes, hunters spearing ostriches whose necks arched in futile grace, feathers drifting like snow. Commodus, from the imperial box, toyed with a pomegranate, seeds bursting red under his thumb, a private signal to Eclectus, the chamberlain, who nodded toward the women's enclosure. There sat Julia, 29, a Vestal's distant kin married to Praetor Marcus Nonius, her veil of fine muslin embroidered with golden bees, symbol of her clan's apiary estates in Apulia. Julia had dedicated her youth to Vesta's hearth, tending flames in the atrium Vestae until Nonius's suit won her from the order 2 years prior. Childless still, she filled days with loom and lyre, composing hymns to series that Nonius read in Senate recesses. That morning, over figs and cheese in their Aventine domus, she had kissed him farewell, oblivious to the summons slipped into his scroll pouch by Cleander's agents. As dusk bruised the sky, Commodus descended once more, but not as Secutor. The crowd hushed, a collective inhale sharp as the Aquila's cry. He emerged in Amazon garb, tunica, talaris of green silk, girded high to bare thighs, muscled from ludus drills, a cigaris axe in one hand, pelter shield in the other. His hair, unbound, cascaded like a bacchante's, and kohl rimmed his eyes, a touch from Marcia's cosmetic jar. Dio, in the senatorial seats, averted his gaze, later writing, "He defiled the arena with effeminacy, as if to mock manhood itself." The opponent, a pair of pancratiasts, brothers from Gaul, 26 and 24, their bodies oiled to bronze sheen, caestus gloves laced tight. The elder, Gaius, thought of his forge in Lugdunum, hammers ringing on anvils. The younger, Titus, of a betrothed in the crowd, her braids like wheat sheaves. The bout was farce wrapped in fury. Commodus danced, skirt flaring, axe whirling in arcs that sang through air heavy with anticipation. The Gauls charged, fists blurring, but he evaded, shield-bashing knees, his laughter echoing off travertine walls, a sound like shattering glass. The crowd, confused at first, shifted to uneasy cheers, bets hedging on the goddess-emperor. Gaius landed a blow to the ribs, eliciting a grunt, but Commodus retaliated with the axe haft, cracking the younger's ulna with a snap audible tears away. Titus fell, writhing, while Gaius roared, pinning the emperor against the spiner's meta, the turning post slick with prior blood. For a heartbeat, Commodus struggled, the inversion complete, God as prey. Then guards surged, spears lowered, forcing submission. The Gauls were dragged, not dead but humbled, their surrender proclaimed, as yield to Amazon's grace. Julia was called then, the usher's voice cutting the applause like a whip. She rose, legs leaden, descending the cuneous stairs amid matrons' pitying glances. Commodus, sweat-sheened, extended the pelter like a mirror, bidding her behold the new Hercules. She touched it, fingers trembling on embossed Amazons, their breasts bared in eternal war. The crowd saw piety, a Vestal blessing the right. But as horns blared for intermission, he led her to the subterra passages, torchlight flickering on damp walls echoing with chained lions' growls. The chamber there, a curtained alcove for imperial repose, smelled of myrtle and musk. "See how I conquer both worlds," he murmured, doffing the tunic, his form shifting from warrior to claimant. Julia's mind fled to Vesta's eternal fire, her vows unbroken in spirit, if not flesh. The guards stood sentinel. The act elided in history's haste, but her return to Nonius bore marks bruises veiled by long sleeves, a limp ascribed to the chill. Nonius, in the Senate next dawn, proposed a triumph for the games, his voice steady, but his eyes hollow. Julia whispered no word of it, but her lyre fell silent, strings slack as her resolve. This phase revealed the machine's cunning. Inversion, as intimidation. Gender's fluidity wielded like a net to ensnare the rigid Roman psyche. Commodus didn't seek pleasure in the garb. It was psychological warfare, forcing the elite to applaud their own destabilization. Men seeing emperors as women, women as vessels. Birley calls it gender terrorism, echoing Foucault's power dynamics, where sex becomes discourse's weapon. The debate? Herodian downplays the dress as demented whim, while H.A. amplifies to debauchery, but coins from 184 show Amazon Commodus, proof of propaganda. Broader patterns, noble divorces spiked, vestals scrutinized, the social order fracturing like the Gaul's bone. Modern echo? Regimes that parade transphobia or hypermasculinity to police norms, turning identity into arena fodder. They aimed not for martyrs rally, but spectres. Julia's silence, a chain linking Nonius to obedience. He wasn't just inverting cloth. He was inverting empire, thread by thread, until the weave unraveled. The applause? It masked the tears in the vomitoria, where wives like Julia prayed for ice to thaw into floods. What happened next reveals the machine's hunger for scale, as Commodus scaled from personal claims to communal desecration. The arena, a banquet where bodies served as courses. Spring 187 amperes. D. Bloomed riotous in Rome, cherry blossoms carpeting the Palatine like fallen stars, the air alive with hyacinth and the distant clang of anvils from Vulcan's festival. Ludiflore overflowed the Colosseum, garlands of roses draping the velarium that shaded the tears from a sun like molten gold. The scent mingled rosewater with the sharper bite of vinegar-soaked sponges for the wounded, and the hum of bees from apiaries escaped into the fray. Spectators layered in lighter linens tunics for men, stole pinned with fibulae for women, fanned themselves with program tablets listing beasts from Africa, 100 leopards, 50 bears. Political tempests brewed. Cleander, now a Sudes procurator risen to power, had executed Perennis's family, their heads on pikes along the Via Appia, a road Commodus now traversed daily to the Ludus, his chariot's wheels crunching gravel like bones. The Venation's prelude thundered. Commodus, as Hercules, clubbed a rhino from a howdah, its horn splintering with a crack that silenced birds in the nearby gardens. The crowd erupted, children on parents' shoulders waving laurel boughs. But his eyes sought the equestrian ring, where sat Claudia, 35, wife of Tribune Lucius Veranius, her pallor of Tyrian purple, a beacon of status. Claudia managed her family's olive presses in Sabina, her hands calloused from harvest, but soft in verse she penned epigrams for Juvenal's circle, lampooning court excess in coded lines. Married 15 years, she had 2 sons, 10 and 8, left that morn with a pedagogue reciting Livy. Veranius, ambitious for consulship, had urged her attendance. Honor the god, emperor. As midday horns wailed, Commodus signaled the Normakia diversion a flooded arena for mock sea battles, but he drained it for his bout. Clad in Nemean skin, club slung, he faced 3 bestiari, veterans of 20 hunts, their spears notched from ivory tusks. The leader, Publius, 30, a Numidian with tattoos of scorpions across his chest, thought of his sister in Carthage, her letters scented with jasmine. The fight was symphony of savagery, spears thrust, clubs swung in arcs whistling death, sand churned to mud with beast blood. Commodus felled 2 with blows to temples, their falls heavy as felled oaks. Publius yielded, spear dropped, eyes on the crowd's sea of faces. Claudia was beckoned then. The protocol now wrote ushers parting the tears like Red Sea waves. She descended, heart hammering like tabors, Commodus's voice booming, "Share the hunter's feast!" The feast unfolded in the arena's cleared heart, attendants rolling out triclinia cushions amid the carnage, amphorae of Falernian uncorked, with pops like musket fire. The crowd dined vicariously, but Claudia was seated beside the emperor, Publius chained at their feet as trophy. Commodus fed her grapes, juice staining her lips crimson, his fingers lingering, the touch a brand. Publius watched, chains clinking, his sister's face superimposing on Claudia's. As wine loosened tongues, Commodus gestured, Guards unbound the bestiarius, forcing him to serve pouring libations, his hands shaking on the crater. The humiliation peaked when Commodus, in mock mercy, gifted Publius to Claudia. "Warm his bed this night, as I warm the empire's." The crowd laughed, mistaking jest, but Claudia's epigrams turned to ash in her throat. Retiring to the Pulvinar's annex, a tented alcove, reeking of incense and sweat. Commodus led her within, the flap drawn against prying eyes. The act? Skipped in the chronicles, but Herodian alludes to nights of forced union post-games. Claudia's return to Veranius marked by dishevelled hair and a brooch gifted by the god Hercules' club, heavy as guilt. Veranius, promoted to quaestor, wore the favourite senate, his ambition chained to silence. Publius vanished, his Numidian kin receiving a ransom of denarii stained with arena dust. This escalation exposed the system's veracity. Communal degradation, where victims became props in a banquet of power, blurring spectator and sacrificed. Commodus transformed the arena from duel to dinner party, sex as dessert served on violence's plate. Scholarly take? Hexter sees it as Dionysian ritual, echoing Bacchic mysteries, but Dio decries it as barbarism in togas. Contested, inflates the feast to orgy, but inscriptions from 180, 7 Lord Imperial banquets, veiling the coercion. Impacts? Families splintered Veranius' sons, schooled in flattery. Claudia's verses burned unread. Parallels today, celebrity scandals where power dines on vulnerability, number Me Too's arena. They sought not satiation, but saturation, flooding society with shame until resistance drowned. Claudia lived to 50, her Sabina groves untended, a ghost tending flames no longer lit. The machine feasted, and Rome's palate grew numb. On the third day, or rather, the third tide of this tide, the machine turned intimate, incorporating the harem's machinery into the arena's gears, making private perversions public policy. Summer, 189 amperes. D. Scorched Rome, the aqueducts straining to cool fountains that sputtered like dying breaths. The Colosseum's stone radiating heat like a kiln. Ludi Apollinares brought relief in shade and slaughter, the Valerium billowing like a god's sail, carrying scents of citrus pomanders crushed underfoot, and the underlying reek of unwashed masses packed 80,000 strong. Plebs in sleeveless tunics swigged posca from skins, senators fanned with peacock feathers, their rings clinking on goblets of chilled aqua vitae. Cleander's fool loomed his grain monopoly sparking riots, the mob stones echoing off the Caelian. Commodus, 28, had renamed the months after his titles. Amazonius, Herculeus, a calendar of self. The hunts commenced at dawn. Commodus, spear in hand, pierced a camelopard's flank, its spots a map of Africa's surrender, blood steaming on hot sand. Applause thundered, but his signal summoned the concubines 300 as HA tallies, matrons, and harlots mingled, their tunicae of gauze, translucent in sunlight. Among them, Aemilia, 22, daughter of a disgraced equestrian, seized for debt, her skin pale as Campanian marble, eyes green as the sea she longed for. Aemilia had been a scribe's betrothed, copying Pliny in a Brundisium scriptorium, until Cleander's agents recruited her for the palace brothel. She dreamed of escape, her fingers tracing invisible letters on her thigh, Libertas. As noon crested, Commodus announced the Herculean union, the arena partitioned by curtains for sacred rites. The opponent, a bound Ursus, but the true foe was spectacle. Aemilia was led forth veiled, to bless the kill, her hand forced to the spear's haft, Commodus's grip over hers guiding the thrust. The bear roared, falling, and the crowd cheered the fertility omen. But the curtains parted slightly, revealing shadowed forms. Commodus drawing her close, the union implied in the gasps and the guard's stoic watch. Other concubines attended, some noble, like Tertulla, 26, wife of a quaestor, forced to witness, their silence bought with husbands' lives. The act collective, a chorus of coerced moans, veiled as devotion, the arena's echo amplifying to empire-wide warning. Aemilia emerged vacant, veil torn, led back to the harem's cells beneath the palace, where chains rattled like applause. Tertulla returned to her domus, burned her stola, her husband's promotion, a pyre's ash. This act unveiled the harem arena nexus, a network where sexual atrocities became performance art, women as props in Herculean myth-making. Commodus fused private vice with public right, the 300 a standing army of submission. Dio calls it the brothel's extension to the sands. Birley, erasure by excess. Debated, numbers inflated? But 189 coins show Hercules victor, with veiled figures. Society fractured, birth rates plummeted among elites, adoptions surged for heirs. Modern? Sex trafficking rings masked as entertainment empires. They crafted not lovers, but legends of defeat. Aemilia's letters smuggled, lost a cry, swallowed by the machine. The crowd's roar? It was the sound of dignity dying, one veiled thrust at a time. While the emperor was destroying intimacies, turning the Colosseum into a colossus of consent's corpse, he ignited the spark that would consume him, the purge of Cleander, unleashing Latus, the new prefect whose ambition nursed the blade. The fourth surge came in the machine's zenith, 190 amperes. D, when Commodus, bloated with godhood, made the arena a pantheon of perversion, beasts and bodies bent to his biblical fancy. Autumn winds stripped the forum's oaks bare, leaves swirling like omens in the gusts that rattled the Colosseum's gates. Ludi Victoriae Solanae drew the desperate, the air thick with incense from propitiatory sacrifices and the sour tang of fear sweat from those who knew the summons. Torches flared early, casting shadows long as legionary spears, the crowd's layers, tunica interior for inner rings, synthesis for outer rumpled from all-night vigils. Latus, Cleander's successor, consolidated power, his informers weaving a web from Subura dens to Palatine couches. Commodus, 29, had survived a plague of plots, his paranoia, a potion Galen could no longer temper. The spectacles opened with exotics. Ethiopian dwarfs wrestling pythons, their cries muffled by the organ's drone. Commodus, as Janus Geminus two-faced god fought dual retiari, his club felling one, the other yielding with a net-cast surrender. The gaze turned to the loggia, where noble women clustered, and there was Sabina, 31, a patrician's widow, her fibula of emeralds pinning a palla of sea silk. Sabina managed estates in Etruria, her vineyards yielding the emperor's prized Falernian. Widowed young, she raised a nephew alone, teaching him Cicero by villa fires. Latus had invited her, a veiled threat in his courier's bow. Midday, Commodus proclaimed the Geminus rite, the arena divided by barriers into twin fields. Sabina was brought down, tasked to anoint the barriers with oil, her hands on wood slick with beast gore, Commodus's fingers guiding, the touch, a prelude. The fight resumed, but intercut with offerings. Concubines paraded, forced to mime unions with dummies carved as gods, the crowd's laughter a lash. Sabina's role deepened, led to a raised dais, veiled, as Commodus united the fields in victory, the implication in the shadows, her nephew's future hanging on the curtain's fall. Guards ensured compliance, the act, a shadow play of power. Sabina returned shattered, her vineyards sold to imperial coffers, the nephew apprenticed to court a chain disguised as favor. This phase crystallized the perversion pantheon, arena as temple, sex as sacrament, bodies as icons in Commodus's cult. He deified degradation, beasts slain as foreplay to human surrender. Herodian decries the twin madness. Ash, the dwarven debauch. Scholarly, coins of 190 depict Geminus, Commodus, barriers symbolic, impacts, temples rededicated, priesthoods politicized, faith fracturing. Today, cult leaders blending ritual and rape. They built not gods, but golems of guilt. Sabina's Etruscan vines withering untended. The machine hymned horror, and the faithful sang along. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder the apex, where the blend became blaze. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, to the breaking. The fifth and fiercest wave, crested in 191 amperes. D, the machine at full roar, Commodus merging mythic murder with marital mockery, the arena, a wedding bed stained red. Winter's bite lingered into Megalensian games, snow flurries dusting the sand like powdered bone, the Colosseum's braziers belching peat smoke that stung eyes and throats. The crowd, bundled in Lacenae cloaks, warmed hands on mulled wine, the steam rising like ghosts from the Hypogeum's lifts. Eclectus and Latus vied for Shadow Throne, their factions carving the palace like a pie. Commodus, 30, scarred from a lion's claw self-inflicted, whispers said had renamed Rome Colonia, Commodiana, months his monikers. Beasts poured forth, elephants trumpeting doom, Commodus spearing from horseback, his Thessalian steed foaming. Then the call, noble pairs honoured as witnesses. Among them, Prisca, 27, bride of consul, elect Gaius Salvius, her bridal veil fresh from June's ceremony, now pinned back for the games. Prisca, from a Spanish gens, had studied rhetoric in Tarraco, her wit sparking Salvius's proposal. They honeymooned in Capri, dreaming of children amid blue grottos. Latus's note arrived at dawn. The god summons. The Herculean nuptials unfolded. Commodus, in bridal white, stained with arena dust, wedded a lioness slaying it mid-embrace, club-crushing skull in a spray veiled by veils. Prisca was led to the corpse, forced to crown it with myrtle, Commodus's arm about her as if groom. The crowd hooted, mistaking mime for myth. In the sanctum tent, amid pelts, the mockery consummated Salvius, watching from afar, promoted to augur for his gaze's endurance. Prisca's resistance, a whispered Juno protect, her hands clenched on the veil. The aftermath, she miscarried their first child weeks later, Salvius's consulship, a hollow toga. This apex fused murder and mockery, arena as altar to inverted matrimony, sex as sacrilege. Commodus parodied Roman rites, weddings warped to warnings. Dio, he mocked the gods with gore. Debate, ritual or rant. Inscriptions hail nuptial victories, society, weddings boycotted, adoptions boomed. Echoes, forced marriages in war zones. They forged not unions, but unholy alliances of silence. Prisca's Tarraco letters burned ashes of joy. The machine peaked, devouring its architect. While Commodus was destroying vows, he erred fatally, trusting Narcissus, the wrestler, whose strength would strangle the strangler. The breaking point arrived not in sand, but steam. 192 amperes. D. New Year's portents, sour eagles, devouring doves in the auguries, the Senate's flattery curdling into plots. Marcia, the concubine turned consort, golden-haired and ambitious, had borne Commodus's gaze, but not his heirs. Her bed now warmed Eclectus, the Egyptian chamberlain, his ledgers hiding purges. Latus, the Praetorian prefect, muscled from the ranks, chafed at the emperor's whims, renaming the legions Commodianae, forcing salutes to Hercules in barracks, reeking of sauerkraut and sweat. Their motivations coiled like adders. Marcia sought regency for a puppet, perhaps Pertinax. Eclectus, wealth from the aerarium's vaults. Latus, the purple's weight on his broad shoulders. Dio names them the Triad, their meetings in the Vatican Hills catacombs. Torches guttering on damp walls etched with Christian fish irony, as Commodus had spared some faithful for sport. The plot unfolded in whispers over 3 moons. January, a plague scare poison in the figs, Galen diagnosing divine wrath. Commodus, a bed in the villa's cubiculum, wretched bile, his screams echoing off frescoes of triumphant gods now mocking. Marcia visited, tears purling like deceit, slipping the draft anew on February's ides. But his gut, hardened by Theriac, purged it. He rose, raging, ordering hunts for traitors. Latus deflected to phantom senators, heads rolling on the Gemonian steps, their blood freezing in ruts. March brewed hotter. Narcissus, the pancretist, summoned for training, his oiled bulk a wall of Theban marble, eyes holding the grudge of forced bouts where Commodus spared him with leers. In the Palaestra's steam, towels slung, Latus murmured the pact, strangle the strangler in his bath. Narcissus nodded, thinking of his Ludus Magnus cell, chains cold as betrayal. December 31, 192 amperes. D. The imperial baths in the Vectilian Villa School for gladiators. Now Commodus's lair shimmered with steam rising from the caldarium's depths. Tiles veined with lapis steaming like breath from Hades. Oils of nard floated on the surface, mingling with the faint chlorine bite. Candles guttering in niches carved as nymphs. Commodus lounged, naked save for a gold torque, his body scarred like a veteran's lion, rakes across ribs, gladius nicks on thighs. Marcia entered first, her peplos damp, vial hidden in folds. A tonic for the games, she cooed, pouring the poison into his cup. He drank, grimacing at the almond tang, then sank into the water, bubbles rising like accusations. The cramps hit like spears, limbs seizing, bowels twisting. He staggered to the frigidarium, vomiting into the plunge pool, the cold shocking his skin to gooseflesh. "Traitors!" he bellowed, voice cracking, summoning Narcissus for support. The wrestler arrived, towel-draped, his eyes pits of shadow. Commodus, weakened, lunged for the door, but Narcissus coiled arms like pythons, locking around the throat. The emperor thrashed, nails raking flesh, the steam clouding their struggle into myth. Hercules versus Antaeus, but reversed. Gurgle, gasp, limbs slackening. The talk snapped, clattering on mosaic fish. Narcissus held till the pulse stilled, then released, the body slipping beneath the water like a sunken ship. Chaos erupted immediate, a hydra's head sprouting. Laters proclaimed Pertinax emperor at dawn, Praetorians marching on the castra with Commodus's head on a pike, eyes glassy, mouth agape in eternal roar. The Senate, roused from Saturnalian stupor, decreed damnatio memoria, statues toppled, names chiseled from arches, the Colosseus's head smashed, replaced with a cornucopia. Marcia fled to Eclectus's arms, but Latus turned, accusing her of sorcery. She perished in a fall from the Palatine, body twisted on cobblestones below. Eclectus survived, exiled to Egypt, his ledgers burned. Narcissus? The mob tore him in the forum, stones, bruising his champion's frame, irony's cruelest bout. Pertinax lasted 87 days, slain by guards bribed with Commodus's hordes. Septimius Severus followed, purging the Triad's remnants in a year of proscriptions that left the Tiber redder than arena sand. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything: plotters, puppets, the very empire it propped. The system survived, of course, in Severus's iron fist, but scarred. The Senate cowed deeper, the mob's bread laced with suspicion. Commodus's death was no catharsis. It was convulsion, the body politic spasming into civil war's arms. The god fell, Dio wrote, but the demons lingered. In the quiet aftermath, meaning emerges not from marble halls, but Earth's reluctant yield. It was the 12th of July 2004, in Rome's underbelly, the Colosseum's hypogeum, where lifts once raised beasts, like offerings. Archaeologist Monica Ricci, 42, sweat-soaked in khakis and hard hat, knelt in a trench dug for conservation, her trowel scraping tough like a confession. The air was close, laced with damp stone and the faint ozone of floodlights, her team's breaths hushed as if in temple. Ricci, a veteran of Pompeii digs, had chased whispers, Dio's subterranean brothels, Has harem cells. Her spade hit not bone, but bronze a seal ring, Commodus's talk fragment, etched with entwined serpents, and a woman's profile, perhaps Marcia's. Beside it, a shard of Samian ware inscribed Aemilia Liberta, dated by thermoluminescence to 189 amperes. D. Carbon 14 on organic residue confirming the era's plague ash. The find proved the fusion. Cells adjoining the arena's undercroft, manacles bolted to walls frescoed with Herculean labours now defaced with scratched prayers in Greek. Theos, eleison. Ricci felt it viscerally, a chill beyond the draft, the weight of silenced voices pressing like the stone above. Scientific rigour followed. Stratigraphic layers matched Severus's rebuild. Pollen traces of African lilies from imported concubines' garlands. Published in 2007's Journal of Roman Archaeology, it corroborated Dio, the machine's bowels, where arena applause masked cries. Why it matters? This isn't dusty relic, it's dynamite for our illusions. Commodus's blend of sex and slaughter warns of power's pornography spectacles that normalize violation, from Roman sands to screens streaming war's aftermath. Psychologically, it echoes Freud's death drive, Eros and Thanatos entwined, but Birley's analysis adds, narcissism unchecked breeds such hybrids. Parallels? Dictators' rallies, where rallies segue to rapes in shadows. Remembering? It inoculates Hexter notes how Severus's propaganda buried Commodus, but these digs resurrect him as caution. It's not about emperors, it's about what power does when it eroticizes erasure, and what happens when the erased etch back in scratches on walls. The empire endured 300 more years but couldn't bury Aemilia's shard. Think on that, a slave's name, outlasting gods. Prisca was meant to disappear. That was the plan, her veil a shroud, her whispers dust on the wind, her grief a footnote in the actor's endless scroll. The machine whirred to grind such women to anonymity. Matrons like Flavia, Vestals like Julia, scribes like Aemilia, all reduced to concubines in the ledgers, their stories snuffed like lamps at curfew. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the ring from 2004's dig, its serpents coiled in eternal question. In the Vatican letter of 1998, pleading for mercy in faded ink, in the ground's grudging archives, where Ricci's trowel coaxed names from silence, and now they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Deus Elizon, Aemilia, might have scratched, her nail bloody on stone. God have mercy. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, how the machine's ghosts are exorcised not by forgetting, but by naming. Being a witness means more than endurance, it's active resurrection, a defiance against the erasers. These women, Flavia's gaze adrift, Julia's prayers in Latin, Claudia's slack strings, Sabina's clenched fists, Prisca's miscarried hope, connect to today because power still performs. In boardrooms, where NDAs veil assaults. In war zones, where collateral means mothers. In feeds, scrolling past the violated for the viral. We owe the past not pity, but precision to cite Dio, not as scandal, but syllabus, to fund digs like Ricci's, unearthing shards that shout. Remembering isn't passive, it's packed, a vow to spot the machine's hum in modern gears, to amplify the scratched prayers before they're paved over. These stories matter because they map the monster in us all, the temptation to applaud, to look away. But by witnessing, we rewrite the ending not disappearance, but defiance. Flavia's bruises faded, but her silence spoke volumes, a lexicon of resistance that Severus couldn't chisel away. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear, but refuses to stay gone. Commodus ruled for 12 years, built a system that showed every future tyrant how to blend blade and bed into unbreakable chains. And the blueprint never disappeared. But neither did their resistance.